Hey guys, welcome to The Beautiful BAME, a new series where we interview and celebrate leading ethnic minority members in relation to the sport of football. Today, we're joined by Moh Haider, who you'll probably know from AFTV TV. Moh, it's a pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you very much, man. Pleasure to be here.
That's a pleasure to have you. So let's get started. What possessed you to become an Arsenal fan?
God, you know what? It's an interesting one, actually, because whenever you talk to people about why they support a team, they've got, more often than not, an influencer. You know, they've got a dad, an uncle, a brother, or something like that. But what's interesting about British Asians and how we get into football teams is that a lot of the time, if you're second generation like I am, my dad didn't care for football. So he wasn't an influence to me. And growing up, I had all of these, I guess, horrible glory hunting United fans, and I was waiting to see if you laughed. I knew it. But yeah, everyone supported a different team. Some people older than me, second generation British Asians, all support Liverpool, and then then you get the United ones. And I think it's hard for me to track exactly what happened because it started so early for me. But I think it was Ian Wright. I think I just I think one of the first games I remember being really emotionally invested in was Arsenal versus Sheffield Wednesday in the FA Cup final, and even the League Cup final that year. Arsenal did the double in domestic cups. So I remember really, really wanting Arsenal to win that. So I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it obviously was before that for me to be emotionally invested in those games, or in that one of those games against Sheffield Wednesday. So I think it was Ian Wright. That's kind of, I've asked my mum, and I've tried to figure out when did that penny drop for me that I just love Arsenal, and it must have been around then.
So there's literally no one else in your family who was interested in football, and I'm even on about like cousins or
no.
Like it was literally. I was in a similar boat. And for me, it was literally the color red. As a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, I was obsessed with the color red. So I could have been an Arsenal fan. I could have been a Liverpool fan. It just happened to be United. I remember that Cantona advert where he kicks the ball at the Shaitan and he destroys him. I mean, that was definitely a turning point for me in terms of wanting to support United as well.
Where do you live, though?
I live in Birmingham. What about yourself?
I live in Milton Keynes. So for me, I've got a good excuse. Milton Keynes didn't have a football team when I was growing up. So there was also not that influence to kind of say, support your local team. I didn't have one. But you, on the other hand.
I knew bringing you on was definitely going to lead to me just being digged at all the way through. Did you have any aspirations of playing football? Did you have any aspirations of being involved with football, say as a football coach? And did you like any other sports?
Listen, I love all sports. I was watching Pakistan beat South Africa in the cricket earlier on today. That gives away when we film this podcast. So listen, there's loads of sports that I love, but football is just. I'm even looking forward to the World Championship snooker starting from tomorrow. There's so many sports that I love, but football is the one. Football is just the one that. And, it's not just me, is it? It's billions of people around the world. There's something different about football. And in fact, I can't remember what university it was, but the university actually did a study into what makes a sport so great, so enjoyable. And they had loads of different components to their formula that they came up with. And football came out on top. There's just something about it. I guess it's the lack of frequency in goals that are scored. So when they are scored, they mean so much more. It's not basketball where, you get to have that little burst of happiness 50 times. In football, you don't get it that often. And I guess this, I don't know what it is about football, but it's just football for me that really, really gets my juices going.
I think it appeals to a wide sort of diaspora of people, a range of people, because it appeals to intellectual people because it's like a game of chess. There's also the passionate element as well. It's got a fitness component, a skill component, and a team component, but it's also got individuals can become stars in it. For example, Maradona, you've got that solo element. So I think it's a really universal sport in terms of it touches every sort of facet of what makes a sport great. So I think that's why it is the beautiful
and
game.
Also very accessible, isn't it? There's various other sports where you need too much equipment, like even cricket, for example. The bat, the ball, something for the wickets, a makeshift boundary, whatever. But with football, jumpers for goalposts and something round to kick. It's brilliant.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. So yeah, did you ever think you could make it as a footballer or not?
God, I dreamt of it, man. I really, really did. Even to this day, I'm 36, and I'm thinking, yeah, there's been some people older than me featuring in the Premier League. I'm still waiting, but when I was younger, I absolutely did. But you know how it is as well. One of the big factors that stops Asians getting there is our parents, generally speaking, here have got a different focus. And my dad, he's a chartered accountant. I followed in his footsteps. He's a numbers guy. He would have looked at the statistics of people that fall out of the process of trying to get to a professional level, and he would have always said to me, just, you've got to focus on your education. That was always paramount. And yeah, so I did play football for various clubs, and always have done my whole life. Even at university, I played for the second team out of 7 teams that we had, and we'll probably go into the reasons as to why I didn't make it for the first team. And I've always loved it, but in truth, I was never good enough. But when you're a kid, you don't know that, and I did want to try and make it.
So you talked about your father being an accountant, and I was going to touch upon, he must have pushed you into accountancy. Did you ever consider doing anything else? I know we've touched upon football was never really an option, but did you ever consider another profession?
Do you know what is a tough one? Like, looking back now, and I think about what really motivates me, like what am I interested in, is that it would be, I'd love to have done PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics. I'd have loved to have done a degree like that, because that's what interests me. Social, like this, the social structure that we live in, and social mobility and politics, that really, really interests me. But I just how I wasn't able to make it as a professional footballer, I was never LSE caliber, when it comes to academia either. So I didn't really know. I didn't really give it too much thought when I was a kid in terms of what you want to do. And this was just kind of a natural progression. It's one of those things where if dad's a doctor, the chances are the kid's going to have a very good chance of becoming a doctor. And that's why you see so many footballers have kids who end up being footballers. It's just, apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. So it just happened quite naturally. My dad didn't actually push me into it, but I could work out that it was a sensible choice. Two things in life are guaranteed: death and taxes. So taxes wise, there's always going to be a need for some finance people, for some accountants. And yeah, I just fell into it, and it's a good, sensible career.
It's funny you touched upon PPE. It's a similar dream to me. Like, my long-term goal is to go into politics. Similar to you, I didn't really have the grades to quite go into LSE or Oxford. It's very limited unis that do PPEs. But funny enough, further down my career, I did have the opportunity to do it. But by that time, you're sort of in a career already. It's very hard then to take time out to go back and do another degree.
Perhaps if I had known what I wanted to do, perhaps if I had that passion for politics or whatever back then, I might have worked harder to go and achieve a dream. But when you don't know what you want to do, where does the motivation really come from to stay in the library and do your work rather than have a kickabout outside with your mates?
Absolutely. So, okay, let's talk about your journey to getting on AFTV. I mean, we don't see many Asian faces in any association with football, especially talking about it. So how did you get on?
So basically, I have been an Arsenal season ticket holder long before AFTV. In fact, my first ever game, I like telling this story. I was 13 years old, so it was 13th September 1997. My first ever game was Arsenal versus Bolton Wanderers, and I don't know how I did it, honestly, because now you've got the internet and everything, and back then, I didn't have any of that. So I was a junior gunner. I think I must have spent like ages on the phone, calling up and booking tickets and that sort of thing. And I think my ticket stub for that day, I've actually got framed upstairs, signed by Ian Wright, with the matchday program signed by Ian Wright as well, because that's the game where he broke the Arsenal goal scoring record. So that was my first game. And to go to that game from Milton Keynes to London, my mum took me up on the train and waited outside the ground whilst I went to watch the game. So I've got to shout out my mum for that, because that's commitment. It's the last thing she would have wanted to do. And so I've been going a long time before that. And when AFT finally came round, I had never heard of them the first time I actually went and did an interview. It was when Arsenal played Aston Villa after a transfer window where we signed absolutely nobody. and we lost 3-1 to Aston Villa at home on the opening day of the season. So you can imagine emotions were riding high. And I was taking my normal route back out from the stadium to go to Arsenal Station or whatever, and I saw these guys filming, and a few people around listening to whoever was talking at the time was saying or whatever. And I'm one of those people where, especially before Arsenal Fan TV, I have to talk about the game. When it gets to me, or when there's something great to talk about, I want to talk about it because it's a form of therapy in a way. It's a nice release. So now I don't do that. My friends and family are probably really glad because I get it all out of my system on AFTV. But before then, it would have been someone. But anyway, I walked past these guys that were filming and I wanted to talk about it. So I hung around and I said, look, let me jump on and have a talk. So I did. And thankfully, there was a bit of a queue to talk. And that first interview that I did kind of went a bit viral. And I'm glad I had about 10 minutes of waiting time, because otherwise I think it would have been a lot less composed and a lot more angry. So I do count my blessings for that. But yeah, it was absolutely natural, absolutely organic. Didn't know who they were, didn't expect it to go up on AFTV. And it was only after it blew up that, I didn't know Robbie, for example, didn't know anyone there. But only after it blew up, it was a case of, yeah, come and do this again. So I did it the next game and the next, and it just became my routine.
The beauty of AFTV is that it gives fans a voice from ethnic minorities as well that you wouldn't quite get in your normal sort of mainstream media. Do you think that's a conscious effort by Robbie in that regard, or it's just sort of panned out that way?
Do you know what what I would say is that what I would give Robbie credit for is that he would never exclude anyone, but that would be awful to do that. I don't think it's necessarily as a conscious effort to include Asians, but or any ethnic minority, but it's just a case of, it's very organic. If you come on and you capture the imagination of the audience and that sort of thing, then naturally there'll be more of a demand for people to hear you speak. So yeah, that I think that's what I like about AFTV, really. It's just very natural. It's not a case of you have to go and do something to get on or whatever. Clearly now it's taken a slightly different form, and people with reputations or with big followings or whatever will be easier for them to get on, and there's so much demand to get on now. I even had a message recently asking me, can I, and I've had many of these, can you get me on and that sort of thing. And that's not really what it's about. It's meant to be a bit more organic than that.
Sure. You talked about the fact that you composed yourself before you spoke. Are you generally quite a measured person in the way that you watch football? I know that's what's been said about you, but is that the way you perceive yourself? And also, when you're watching a game, how are you breaking it down in your head? What sort of factors are you looking for?
So the first one, listen, man, I have to admit I'm a massive fraud. I've got a nephew who's like 12 years old, and he looks up to me. I've got him into Arsenal, we've been to loads of games together and stuff. I know he watches my interviews. There's no way I'm ever going to go on in front of hundreds of thousands of people and start swearing and effing and blinding and that sort of thing. Obviously, I get passionate. That's a given. I have my rants and that sort of thing. But in, I don't know, about 6 years of doing AFTV, not once have I ever uttered a cuss word, basically. I've written words that I wouldn't say in front of my nephew, but never never a bad one sort of thing. And that's tough. That really is tough, because the reason why I say I'm a fraud, if you watch football with me, and it's one of those games, I'm very, very different in the fans and on TV, and that's it. Like I struggle to watch football in front of my dad because sometimes the games can bring out a side to me. But I have to admit, I have calmed down a lot in recent years, and so I am still a bit of a fraud, but not as much as I was when I first did my first interview. And secondly, when I'm watching the game, for example, it depends on what the game is, because if it's Arsenal, I watch it as a fan. I really I find it hard to step back and look at it tactically and that sort of thing. Whilst when I was watching, let's say, as an example, PSG versus Bayern Munich recently, I was just watching in admiration at how PSG were beating the press, and I was thinking about how Arsenal struggled to do it, other teams struggled to do it, and what PSG were doing differently in order to beat such a brilliant, well-rehearsed press of Bayern Munich and that sort of thing. And I watch it in a more of a purist way when I'm watching any game that isn't Arsenal. But my God, when it's Arsenal, it's just different.
because you have such an analytical brain, I was just wondering, would you ever be interested in, for example, either coaching or being a chairman of a football club with your business background as well? Would that ever appeal to you?
You know, it's very funny actually, because I am currently doing a contract, and that contract, you know, in my professional life comes to an end at the end of June. And someone sent me, in fact, it's funny, Arsenal put on a link on LinkedIn. They put on a role profile for a commercial finance manager. And I've done a lot of commercial finance. You know, I'm more commercial FP&A than I am technical and statutory accounts and that sort of thing. So someone tagged me in that, and I thought to myself, oh, how interesting. You know, the timing could work out. But I've seen opportunities come up with Arsenal before, and I would not want to work for Arsenal themselves, because I think as a fan, seeing the decisions that are made internally and how the funds are allocated and resources are used for the benefit of the brand rather than let's go and win trophies, I think that would really frustrate me. So actually, I want to enjoy Arsenal. That's what I want to do. I just want to enjoy Arsenal. But I would absolutely love to work for the Premier League or the FA or something of that nature, where it's football related, but then I'm not sort of having a conflict of interest in terms of what we are doing versus what I think we should be doing. So yeah, I would like to. I definitely would like to. And as for coaching, well, I think, you know, I don't feel like I've got any God-given right to assume that I'd be a better coach than anyone else out there. There's people that have worked really hard and got their badges and that sort of thing and have put in years and years into it. So even for my local community, for example, I don't do the coaching. And I think one thing I've struggled with my whole life is that when I get on the football pitch, I'm quite competitive. And so I don't know if that lends me to coaching very well, because, you know, I look at Thierry Henry, for example. Unbelievable footballer, insanely fiery and competitive and arrogant, and has high standards in the way he plays the game. But do I look at him and think you're the best manager out there? Probably not. I feel as though I've actually seen some things, and I really hope he proves me wrong, because I absolutely adore the guy. But I've seen some traits in his managerial style in the past where I think to myself, I wonder if your players like you or not. And that, for me, is because of his absolute relentless desire to win and the high standards he carries.
No, that makes sense, because some players, they do come across well as pundits, but as soon as they go into coaching, take Gary Neville, for instance, you know, he completely flopped it. Which, let's move on to what's been the highlight of your job so far in terms of AFTV. Has it been meeting Gary Neville or Ian Wright?
No, Gary Neville. Meeting Ian Wright, for me, you know, the fact that it's more than that, actually. It's not just meeting him, because I've met him on a few occasions now. It's the fact that, you know, when I see Ian Wright, he knows my name. He knows my wife's name, and he'll greet me and her with a lot of affection. To me, that's crazy. You know, there was one occasion where, you know, because I'm very, very lucky, because he's my absolute childhood hero. There's no one that ranks above him for me. If you ask me who the best player of all time is, Messi comes second to Ian Wright. That's just the way it is for me. I absolutely love him. And I've told him to his face, I'll take a bullet for him. I absolutely love Ian Wright, you know. So for me, the best thing about AFTV is that I've met Ian Wright. I know Ian Wright on a personal basis. I've spoken to him on the phone. One morning, my wife woke me up saying, answer your phone, Ian Wright's calling you. To me, that was mad, you know, absolutely mad. I was in Pakistan once, and I was, you know, watching an Arsenal game with a few Arsenal fans in Pakistan or whatever, and I dropped him a message, because this was recently, he took a bit of stick for saying something about fans from abroad, and he shouldn't have said it. He apologized, and I messaged him. I said, look, you know, I just want to put that rumor to bed. Can I jump on FaceTime with you whilst I'm here? So we did it, and there I am, just some random Pakistani Arsenal fans in Lahore watching a game with me, and I've said to them, do you know what, here's a little treat for you. And my phone's being passed around, and loads of these gooners are talking to Ian Wright. Like, it's, to me, that is just absolutely incredible, and I find that really, really humbling, but I love that.
He seems like a really humble guy. Really humble guy.
Best, man. You know, people say don't meet your heroes, and I say you should get better heroes, because Ian Wright doesn't disappoint, man. He's just such a nice, down-to-earth guy. You know, there's a few footballers that I've met that I like that. For example, Marlon Harewood. I've met him as well. You'd be amazed. You'd think that he works in some sort of, I don't know, monastery or something. How he carries himself is such a softly-spoken, humble guy, even though he's very successful even after football. And Ian Wright, again, is in that category where you just meet him and you're like, wow, how are you such a nice guy? Whilst on the other hand, Thierry Henry, I love him. He carries himself differently, for example. So some people, they're disappointed when they meet Thierry Henry. Not me, though. I kind of feel like he's just an extension of what he was like on the pitch, and I love him regardless. But Ian Wright's he's a legend.
We saw your interview with Gary Neville with the rest of the AFTV boys, and it got a bit feisty. Did you get the perception that he disrespected fans' opinions and doesn't think fans should have an opinion that matches, say, an ex-professional footballer? And what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that definitely exists in the media, and when I say media, I mean punditry all the way to tabloids and that sort of thing. And even, for example, online blogs, even podcasts, someone like yourself, I've got no idea how you view fan pundits or what people do on AFTV. And I've got no idea whether that has changed in your own mind over the last few years as it's become more established. Mm-hmm. I do think it has changed, but I think a few years ago, you go back and let's say, for example, a journalist for a tabloid would look at what we do and really look down on it. And it's funny because I have never, ever cared what a journalist thinks or says. I've never even cared what an ex-professional thinks or says. And it was a real shock to me how much validity football fans give the opinions of journalists and ex-footballers, because the way I see it, you're just one man. And it doesn't really matter to me if you've played the game before or not, because you'll have 3 pundits in a studio. And if you're going to put people that have played the game professionally on a pedestal as more valid to speak about the game or any incident or whatever, what happens when they disagree? If it was true that ex-professional players have more of a say, or what they say is more valid than fans, for example, what you would see is fans reaching a sort of consensus on an issue or on an incident, and then footballers, ex-professional footballers, reaching their own consensus and it being consistent. But actually, no, it mixes up. Some fans will agree with one professional, and one professional will agree with other fans. And to me, what that proves is actually it doesn't matter. Your understanding of the game doesn't come from having played it. It's about living and breathing it. And it's interesting because, now we're seeing Alex Scott, who's an ex-Arsenal legend herself, rumoured to be taking over Football Focus duties. And previously it was Dan Walker. Now, no one gave Dan Walker any stick, even though he hasn't played professionally, purely because he was a man. But loads of people are up in arms about Alex Scott, who has played professionally, who has won an insane amount of trophies and had an illustrious career, but people are giving her a lot of stick. And for me, I think it's kind of mirrors the same journey. Fan pundits go on as female pundits, and actually it's all a load of nonsense. If you know the game and you talk about the game well, that's all that counts.
Yeah, I think playing the game to some extent doesn't have to be professional, but playing it to some extent. I mean, exactly. You yourself, you've played at university level or whatever it was. It does give you some element of an understanding 100%. Of the game. But once you've played it to a certain level, I totally agree with you. I think there's some limitations. Obviously, some professional players, they can really absorb what they've had to learn as players, and they're able to process it and sort of spread that message or communicate that message better. Take Johan Cruyff, for example, someone who mastered the game as a footballer and mastered the game as a coach. So he's someone who's quite unique in that respect. So I would take his opinion more than anyone else's. But I think those type of examples are quite rare. Not every footballer has that same level of insight.
And that's where I say the house of cards can fall sometimes, because I completely understand what you're saying about Johan Cruyff, for example. But then what happens if Pep Guardiola and Johan Cruyff disagree on something?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Like I said,
it doesn't make you sort of, it doesn't make what you say a gospel truth just because you've been a brilliant professional or brilliant manager. But I do really agree with what you've just said there, Race, because you have to have played the game in some capacity. Because I would never dream of going and talking about rugby or hockey as some sort of expert, because I've never really played it and I don't really understand the intricacies of the game. And there will always be a level that professionals can speak about with credibility that we can't, in terms of the media pressures or in terms of the halftime sort of tactical, or let's say we're talking about medicals joining clubs. There's certain things that are only about the professional game that we wouldn't have experienced at the levels we've played at. So I accept there is kind of a 10% that we can't speak about, but the rest of it, hey, listen, it's all fair.
And even if you can't speak about it from first-hand knowledge, you can always learn about it through, through doing your research and picking
100%.
up stuff like that. I mean, the reason why I mentioned that was because from my experience as a football coach, I started coaching very young, and I realized that I was hitting a ceiling in terms of my ability to transmit messages to players and also my understanding of the game. And then when I went away and played it for a little bit, it did help my coaching, because I could now picture how big an 11-side pitch really is and how tiring it can be to actually play it. And these factors have influenced my coaching and my analysis in the long term. So yeah, no, but overall, definitely get your point. What I wanted to ask you was, you've got some epic quotes. You mentioned the thing that went viral. I think it was, you said, you get what you pay for unless you're an Arsenal fan. Do you have like a scrapbook of your favorite quotes? Do you prepare beforehand in terms of, yep, I'm gonna come up with this biggie in terms of a quote, or is it all just literally off the top of your head when you're being spoken to by Robbie?
Firstly, no, I do not have a scrapbook about myself. I'm really not that self-obsessed. And also I think that sometimes people are a bit disappointed when they speak to me about AFTV, because I'm not proud of it. It's not something that I feel like is a big deal. I just think that loads of people could do what I do. Loads of people could have been had that timing. It was just timing that I just happened to walk past on that day at that time and had the time to stop and talk. Had I if I was more popular and I had friends saying to me, "Oh, let's hang out afterwards," and I might not have had that time. It's it's not something that I really hold on to with loads of affection or whatever. But what I would say is that 99% of the time I do not prepare. Clearly, there'll be something in games where you think to yourself, "Oh, I want to say that," or "I've noticed this, so I want to speak about that." But in terms of one-liners and that sort of thing, look, you can clearly tell when someone's doing that. And I personally find it really lame when people go on and they're really contrived about it. That's not what this is about. This is about fans talking from the heart. And I feel like, it kind of loses its appeal. And, another thing that people are surprised about when I talk to them about this, that I consume hardly any fan media that people would probably expect I do. And that's because I think a lot of it is quite contrived. And especially when people realize that Arsenal Fan TV has got such a huge audience, people go on there for their own motives. And I prefer to watch people that have been on there for the motive that I went on, because they just want to speak about a game. In the past, that would be people paying to call up TalkSport, for example, and speak about it. And I'm just doing that for free. I'm not really a fan of when people are trying to build their own profile. And, you can see some people, they come up with little stunts or whatever to try and go viral and that sort of thing. And it's not really what I'm about. So I don't consume that much. I only consume very few people who I actually want to listen to.
It's funny, that's literally going to lead into my next question, which is, obviously you're not into fan media, but who are your sort of pundit role models? Who do you look at or listen to and think, yeah, that guy knows his football, he makes sense?
Well, I'd say it's an interesting one, actually, and people would be really surprised by this, but one person that I listened to that I think, do you know what, you speak about the game really well, was actually Frank Lampard. I really, really liked him as a pundit. Another one, when it comes to specifically strikers, is Ian Wright. The way Ian Wright breaks down a striker's approach, and even the way he talks about his own goals, you can tell that he views it differently. Like, he just gets it to another level. So here's another one that I really like as well. Also, I have to admit, I really enjoyed Alan Hansen back in the day. Defensively, I thought he was really, really good. And Alex Scott, I think, is a brilliant female pundit. So I'm looking forward to Football Focus when she's doing that, even though I feel like it's a slightly different role. But, I think she's a really, really good pundit there. And Jamie Carragher, I do like the way, apart from the there bit, that really gets to me. He needs to stop doing that. There really gets me. I think he's a really good pundit as well. And the way him and Gary Neville, they've got a winning formula there, because the way they kind of bat onto each other is just brilliant.
Yeah, I think Jamie Carragher, I mean, all the names you listed, totally agree with all of them. I think out of the modern lot, Jamie Carragher for me stands out. And it's hard to say that being a United fan, but for me, he's a lot more blunt and to the point, and just speaks a lot of sense without it being biased than Gary Neville does. With Gary Neville, I always feel he's got some sort of agenda behind it these days as well, compared to when he first broke through. It was a lot more fresher, more hard hitting, whereas now it seems a bit more contrived for me. But yeah, how do you find enough time to sort of work full time, go to Arsenal games, get time to go on AFTV? Do you have any sort of tips in terms of organizing your life, or how does it all work out?
No, I probably don't. The thing is, it's hard. It's hard because I might sit here and say, oh, I do this and that. And then you might speak to my parents, or you might speak to my family or my nieces, my nephew, and they might say, well, actually, no, he doesn't do this or he doesn't do that. So look, I guess I'm just lucky that I've got that freedom and flexibility. My wife's cool. She's not, the naggy type. She gets me. She knew I was an Arsenal fanatic before she married me. So yeah, I don't know. I guess you just, when it comes to your passions, you just find the time. But then on the other hand, there's loads of other things that I would like to have done. I'd like to have been a bit more successful outside of my career in terms of not so much a side hustle, but other investments and that sort of thing. And perhaps these things have gone wanting because I've been too busy spending time at Arsenal. So who knows, man? There's always an opportunity cost. But, we were talking about this before we started. I've got a six-week-old son now, and that's my firstborn. So life is going to change. I don't know whether I'll be able to. I don't know whether I'll have the desire to go and do away games, to go and watch Arsenal struggle to a 1-0 win at Burnley, or to go to, all the way to, I don't know, let's say Brighton and watch us get beat or something like that. I don't know if I want to do that anymore. And that makes life a lot more difficult. But, I just think for the things you love, you do find a way. So hopefully I can continue to do that.
A word on Claude and the dangers of social media. How hard is it to read abusive comments about yourself, and what coping mechanisms do you use to cope with it?
God, firstly, I'm glad you brought up Claude. I've known him for a long time, and when I speak about people doing things for their own profile, or people doing things just because they're a proper fan, what I love about Claude, and there's a few other people like Claude, but we'll focus on Claude for now. He was going to Arsenal games, home and away, every single game he could go to, he could afford to go to, he had the opportunity to go to, he would go to, long before AFTV. And what you see now is there's a lot of other people who they increase their love of Arsenal because of AFTV, because they know that it will benefit them. For me, I could never get away tickets because you have to, it's a very, very difficult, I won't bore you with the details, it's very difficult to get away tickets, a bit of a closed shop. Having become part of AFTV, other avenues opened up to me, so I was able to go to more games. But Claude, he's set apart from people like me and other people that optionally didn't go to games or couldn't go to certain games. He was just there week in, week out. Unfortunately, he couldn't necessarily go to European games, but that's no fault of his own. And that's why he's one of the OGs. He really is. And unfortunately for him, he has had a tough life. He's lost his mum, and he never recovered from that. He would regularly talk about it and bring it up. And on top of that as well, he struggled with mental health. And it's really sad because, I always feel like when people die, the world appreciates them more and they kind of treat them with more kindness. It's weird, isn't it? Like even famous artists, when they die, their work is more in demand and goes up in value. And you think, well, that's a shame. They weren't around to see it. And with social media, often you see people with an outpouring of nice things to say about people once they die. And you think, well, hold on a second. Before, they used to get no end of abuse. And unfortunately, Claude was one of those people that people used to get a rise out of him. They used to really target him because they knew that he was an easy target. And he did struggle with that. And I find it a real shame that now people are so concerned with not bad words being spoken about Claude in his death, but in his life, there wasn't that caring consideration for him. And, I feel bad for Claude because I felt like he could never compartmentalize the idiots compared to the vast outpouring of positive comments that he got. And it did bother him at times. I'm very lucky in that everyone's different. And I just have always been one of those sorts of people where when I used to see fans get really riled up about what a pundit, a journalist has said about Arsenal, I used to find that quite funny. I used to find it quite bizarre. I didn't know the names of any journalists before joining AFTV. And when I joined AFTV and people complain about John Cross, who works for the Mirror, or Henry Winter, who works for the Times, for example, I used to be like, how do you guys know these people? I didn't bother reading the papers, and I was just like, I just found it baffling that they cared so much. And by extension, I found it baffling when I used to get negative responses to social media, because I used to think, hold on, why do you care so much what I'm saying? Because I've always just been a bit, I don't know what the term is, maybe a bit stubborn almost. I care about what I say, and I care about what other people whose opinions I respect and whose people I know who they say, what they say. So I think my motto has always been, if I don't know you personally, I won't take it personally. And, that's because, so I've got to know you personally to even stand a chance. But if I know you personally and I think, oh God, you talk absolute nonsense, I'll hear it out and, I'll just brush it off. There's very few people, and mainly for me, when it comes to football, there's a few people, but when it comes to other things, such as the way you carry yourself and some of the other feedback you get on social media, I'll listen to my wife, I'll listen to my parents, I'll listen to my family and my close friends, not random people that tweet me, but that's just the way I am. So I feel very lucky. Alhamdulillah, I feel very lucky that God has given me a really, really thick skin, and it just doesn't bother me. But what I would say is that there have been days where, you might have tweeted something, or something might have happened, something might have been captured or whatever, and it's so relentless that I have actually noticed there'll be some evenings where I'll be like, something's bothering me. And then you realize, you think, well, what is it? When you actually try and catch up with your thoughts, and you think, well, actually, yeah, it is social media. So whilst it might not affect my mental health, it's annoying me. It's put me in a bit of a bad mood. Like, I'm not as happy, I'm not as, for example, chirpy with my wife, I'm not joking around with her and that sort of thing. So you do think, actually, yeah, it does have an impact, but I guess it's about being able to catch that and realize that and not let that spiral. And thankfully I've got the ability to do that.
No, that's a really wonderful insight. I mean, just touching on Claude, being a United fan, I'm part of a quite prominent United forum, and literally Claude was one of our favorites on AFTV. I can't recall negative words ever being said about him. So I think, generally speaking, you're right. I think he's very much widely respected and loved by even opposition fans. But like you mentioned, it just takes that small amount of people who do bring the negative vibes, and you've got to have that mental sort of sturdiness to be able to withstand that. And poor Claude probably didn't have that in his locker. Let's move on to just Arsenal now. We move away from AFTV. What's been your favourite moments as an Arsenal fan?
Favourite moments as an Arsenal fan, obviously the Invincible era, because, it wasn't just about the trophies that we won, but, when I say that, when it's not Arsenal, I watch the game as a purist. I was able to do that as an Arsenal fan. I was able to watch Arsenal play and win as someone that enjoys, like, the purist side of football. And when I say that, I mean, mentally, physically winning with style and swagger, scoring great goals, playing football in the right way, not being overly pragmatic, not doing sort of like the park the bus sort of football style and trying to grind things out, things coming to you easily, effortlessly, playing with just that openness. And I loved it. That period was just absolutely incredible. Winning doubles, going the whole season unbeaten, they were my absolute highs. And also my early days as an Arsenal fan, because you have a bit more of a less involved view of the game. You don't know about boardroom disputes and what the players are doing that they shouldn't be doing and all of this sort of thing. You just go there and you watch it and you soak it in, and the atmosphere is new to you. So for me, I think my favourite game will always be my first game, because, I remember on that game, when Arsenal, and I'd never experienced this before, so it was all new to me. When Arsenal attack, everyone stands up, and this was in the North Bank. And as everyone stands up, the chairs that we're sitting on, the seats would hit the back. And the first time I heard that noise, I got distracted and I didn't look at the attack, and I looked around. I was like, what was that noise? It's like thunder. It was like, to me, it sounded like a machine gun. It's just those things that give you the feels when you're at the game, all those experiential things that you're used to now, but you weren't back then. And I kind of look back at them and I think, do you know what? I love that period. I'd love to go back and do my first game all over again.
And what about your top 5 players, past and the current lot as well?
Just Arsenal.
Yeah.
So Ian Wright, Thierry Henry, Dennis Bergkamp, and then it's Patrick Vieira, no, Tony Adams, then Patrick Vieira.
And what about the current lot? This will be interesting, I think.
Do you know what? Unfortunately, there's really not that many that I like in the current lot.
I thought this would be the case, which probably brings us to the next question. What is the root of Arsenal's current issues?
Let me answer it though, because there are a few that I do like. I love Kieran Tierney. Yeah. I think he's exactly what a professional footballer should be. And I love Emil Smith-Rowe. I love Bukayo Saka. I love Gabriel Martinelli. So these are players that when I see them playing, I just think, yeah, you know, you guys are brilliant. And there's a few others that obviously I like, but I think they're the standout ones for me that I just think that, yeah, you know, you guys are, you know, really, really like you. I feel like really, really want to see them do well, and they're humble, keep their feet on the ground, and have been positives for Arsenal this season. And the root of Arsenal's problems, God, that's a tough one. But if I had to pin it down and not do a long, boring lecture about the things that are up with Arsenal, it's the board. Because, you know, for me, culture starts from the top, and Arsenal have got an acceptance of mediocrity, and, you know, there's a lot of things that I think that, you know, I would not be as tolerant about if I was the owner of Arsenal Football Club. But I don't think that the ambition to necessarily mix it with the very best in Europe is there. It's about capital growth, as far as I'm concerned, for Stan Kroenke.
You seem pretty negative, I think, about Arteta, just based on the videos I've watched of you recently. And when Emery got sacked, you were quoted as saying you wanted either Allegri, Pochettino, Ten Hag. In hindsight, would you have taken those options instead of Arteta?
In hindsight, look, you know, people get very emotional about Mikel Arteta, and I find it really weird because, you know, take the emotion out of it. Just look at the facts. We're, what, 9th or 10th in the league? That is awful. Absolutely awful for Arsenal. We've limped through the Europa League. If you look at it, we haven't exactly coasted through. I feel like United, your route to the semi-final of the Europa League has been a lot less eventful than Arsenal, you know. So I don't think we've been very impressive there. So I think, of course, you know, the reason why I wanted an Allegri, for example, as my top choice is because he's a proven manager with an incredible track record. And, you know, Arteta is essentially on work experience, you know. I know Arteta's really, really highly rated within the game, but I find that interesting because when you look at how people talk about Zinedine Zidane, for example, I feel like only this season has the narrative about Zidane changed. Before, people used to accuse him of just chucking out 11 players and hoping for the best almost. He won back-to-back Champions Leagues and, you know, did brilliantly for Real Madrid. And now he's back there. I feel like, again, he's doing too well for people to chuck out that lazy narrative. But the footballing community didn't rate him or respect him. They didn't give him all of the praise that I feel like I've seen of Mikel Arteta. Loads of different people coming out and saying he's great or whatever. I mean, look at Marcelo Bielsa. Again, football community raves about him. They really do. And rightfully so. He's done an incredible job with Leeds. But that doesn't mean that I'd necessarily take him as the next Arsenal manager over someone like Allegri or Pep Guardiola, for example. You know, so the way I see it, I would still take Allegri. I would still have taken Pochettino over Arteta. But I do trust that Mikel Arteta has got a lot about him, and yeah, I guess you might have gathered some negativity from me on him. I think that's just a reflection of where Arsenal are and how we have been and the troubles within the squad, and also his relentless mistakes in team selection, and also how he's treated some players. I think selection-wise and man management-wise, he's got a lot to learn. But in terms of understanding of the game, that's great. But I think what someone like Jurgen Klopp proves is that not only do you need the understanding of the game, you also need the players to love you. You also need the fans to love you. And when you do that and you get all of those things combined, that's when you get real momentum. Arsenal have never really got momentum. And you'll know this as a United fan. Solskjaer, what's the secret to his success this season? I don't think he's the tactical mastermind all of a sudden. I think, do you know what? He's got the players' trust and he's got the players working for him. And he's proved that actually, do you know what? No matter how bad it gets, he'll be there for the players. He'll give them that protection. And they're just simply a team that's playing for him, and he's keeping keeping it quite simple with his selections and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I feel like, Arteta could go on to be a great manager, but the jury is very much still out on him.
So trying to pick your analytical brain, you just touched upon United there. What's your thoughts on United, City, Chelsea, Spurs? If you can give me a brief overview of these rival clubs and where they're at the moment and where you see their futures panning out in the next sort of 2 to 3 years.
City are right at the very top. They are the absolute real deal. No one can say they're not worthy champions. And I feel like City and Liverpool need each other to be as great as they are. We saw City drop off last year, but prior to that, they set an incredible standard. And I'm absolutely loving that battle between City and Liverpool because I feel like they are the elite teams in England. Mm-hmm. And clearly Liverpool are having a very difficult season. And there is the risk that Jurgen Klopp brings an element of burnout to his managerial style. And I'm really eagerly looking at whether he can turn that around. Because with Dortmund, let's not forget, it kind of petered out. He took them to greatness and it kind of petered out because it's very, very hard to maintain that level of intensity. When it comes to United, I feel like I don't think you're the second best team in the country. I have to be honest. I feel like Liverpool are, the second best team in the country. And I feel like United and Leicester, for example, you probably shade them. But I think Leicester are a really, really serious team as well. I think they're a really good team. Again, the questions come up with Brendan Rodgers as to whether he can hack it at the business end of a season. And we just saw their last game. They lost 3-2 to West Ham. 3 players were at COVID, a party in breach of COVID regulations. They were dropped. And I just thought, man, I feel sorry for Brendan Rodgers because these questions always come up for him. And that's the last thing he needed against a team like West Ham who are on such an incredible run where he had an opportunity to prove himself and say, no, business end of the season against a team competing for the same spots, I can hack it. His players did him no favours. Leicester have got 4 easy games coming up. So I'm really looking forward to seeing whether Leicester really are one of the teams that can hack it and we can start speaking about them as, let's say, real competitors to United, for example, next season for the 3rd best team in the country. United and Chelsea and that sort of thing, or whether they will always be the also-rans. As for Chelsea, under Thomas Tuchel, I have to say, wow, what a transformation. He's really, really got them playing to a higher standard, a higher level of football. And I think it's interesting because with Lampard, they might have almost been more fun to watch. They might have probably had a higher expected goals or probably scored more goals. But under Tuchel now, they are more of a proper hard to beat team. And there they are in the semi-finals of the Champions League. As much as I dislike them, they're a proper team. As for Tottenham, well, look, under Mourinho, I'm just not worried.
I think that says it all. I mean, we've been blasting Mourinho all of this season on our podcast. I think he's just done really at domestic level, at the elite end of things. But yeah, we could do a whole hour on that. Okay, so let's move on to the fact that, we invited you because you are an ethnic minority. It's rare to see ethnic minorities in the situation that you're in. Have you experienced any racism through working at AFTV?
What do you reckon the answer is to that before me saying anything?
I would say definitely. I'd be very surprised if you hadn't.
Definitely. And that's the thing. It's like, you're asking me a question, and to many people that might be a question on face value where you're actually intrigued about the answer. But and I know, with never ever having spoken before about this, that that's a completely rhetorical question. 100% I would have been the victim of racist abuse time and time again. And, unfortunately, as Asians, we are not what people necessarily want to see when it comes to football. It's almost like, why am I listening to an Asian talk about football? I don't see no Asian footballers. I don't see any Asian managers. What are you doing talking about it? Who are you to speak about it? The amount of times I've been told to stick to cricket, relentless. And, and not just as a Muslim as well, not just as an Asian as well, but as a practicing Muslim, I've had a lot of stick for that as well. So, yeah, it's relentless and it's just really unfortunate, and I think one thing that's also is quite upsetting as well is that there's a lot of focus about kicking racism out of football, but because the racism that is
Is it increasing? Is racism increasing now in football based on your experiences, or do you think it's just because of social media, it's just there's more awareness.
No, I think it is increasing because of social media. It's not that because of social media there's more awareness. I feel like maybe there could be, maybe some people could even be kidded into thinking there's not as much because it's not as vocal, it's not on the terraces. But because of social media and their complete reluctance to do anything about it, there's actually a hell of a lot more. If social media didn't exist, I would have had hardly any racist abuse. But it's only because of social media that is so important in what you and I are doing and trying to talk about football and actually have a platform. So, you know, there's kind of the rock and the hard place that we're stuck in. We need social media to have a platform and a voice, but it's only because of social media that we get all of this racist abuse. But yeah, what I was going to say is that when it comes to racism in football, so much of it is centered around racism against black individuals. And that's because they're the managers, they're the footballers, you know, they're the ones who are getting it at the highest level. Racism against Asians is not taken seriously because there's no high profile Asians who are the victims of racism. Who can you think of that in let's say in a Premier League world would be the most high profile victim of racism as an Asian?
You can't really think of any, can you? I mean, obviously you got players like Michael Chopra back in the day and stuff like that.
Hamza Chowdhury, maybe.
Hamza Chowdhury would probably be in a good place to speak about it. You've got Zidane Iqbal coming through as a youngster at United, but you know, it's just not enough faces for it.
So unfortunately, people only take it seriously when it's really, really high profile, and you know, we're just not high profile enough, so no one cares. And I just hope that that tide changes and we get into those positions of being more high profile, and then if it happens, which I hope it doesn't, then maybe it will be taken more seriously.
So we've seen some ethnic minorities, South Asians, break through as presenters. We've seen on Match of the Day, there's been Asian presenters. We're seeing on BT Sport, there's been Asian presenters. But are they just seen as token diversity figures? Are we actually going to see an Asian breakthrough as a proper pundit, say on the Match of the Day panel? Do you ever see that happening? How likely is that?
Well, I mean, the one thing I would say is that if we're trying to be really fair, right, the one common denominator between all pundits, so we're not talking about people doing the Gary Lineker role, we're talking about people doing the role on the other side of the sofa.
Yeah.
One common denominator is that they've all played the game. So until Asians have played the game at a decent level, and, you know, you look at the sort of players that are sitting in those seats, they're not nobodies, you know, they're household names. So until there's an Asian who becomes a household name, you know, maybe I'll say it's fair enough that they're not going to be there on that side of the sofa, even though I'd love to see that happen. But why would they replace, let's say, Jamie Carragher with Zishan Rahman, for example, who has played but isn't a household name? That would be a strange move, and I would understand the broadcaster decision on that. I am grateful, though, that we have seen some Asians on the other side of the sofa, because there, as I mentioned, Dan Walker earlier, he has had, you know, the gig without playing professional football, playing professional football. Jake Humphrey, who I think does a brilliant job on BT Sport, he hasn't played professional football. He's doing it. And then we have seen, it's Manish Bashar, is it, who was the Match of the Day 2 host. And now we've got Reshmin Chowdhury, who's doing a great job on BT Sport, and really, really enjoy seeing her. Often you don't see her, but I know because, you know, they say the name and I've met her before and I really wish her well. She's interviewing players post-game and that sort of thing. So at least we've got that representation there. And I think it's disrespectful to say that it's tokenism, because these are really, really talented individuals who do a really, really good job. But it's just a shame that that's the only side of the conversation they can be on. They're the ones asking the questions rather than me as a fan pundit being lucky enough to give my opinion on the game. And I think we need to move more into that space where we can speak about the game and say, hold on a second, we've got a voice too. We know our stuff too.
No, absolutely. Okay, so before we go, I just wanted to give you the chance to talk about your Orphan Initiative and the sort of work you've done for it, and how, you know, the people watching can help you out too.
Yeah, so do you know what I have to say? Like, this is probably the thing that I'm proudest of. As I said to you earlier, I don't hold on to what I do with AFT with much pride. I don't think it's anything special. I don't consider myself a celebrity or anything like that. But what I do think is that it gives me a good platform to try and do something useful with. So what I did 5 years ago is that I thought, look, 50,000 people follow me on Twitter or whatever it might be. So I thought I'd try and fundraise to sponsor an orphan. And this is just with people I've never met, just with people that follow me. And my thinking was that, you know, it's £30 a month, so £360 a year. And if we can get 120 people to just do £3 each, what's 120 out of 50,000? So that would raise the money that we needed. So I tried that, went really well, raised the money. Obviously, once you start sponsoring an orphan, you want to keep on sponsoring an orphan. And I did this, I always do this in Ramadan. So I started this off in Ramadan, and it worked really well. So the next year, I did it again. And the first year, we managed to get a bit of a surplus. By the second year, I just tried to raise the same amount again, but it went so well that I managed to up it to 3 orphans. So quite amazingly, here I was sitting there thinking, with loads of people I've never met before, we're sponsoring 3 orphans, and this is just strangers in the actual cesspit of social media, which is Twitter, and we're managing to do something so good. And what I would say is that this isn't me, I'm just facilitating this. This is other people who are being generous enough to contribute. I'm not donating anything, it's all of these guys. I just put up a tweet. And then we did that in the second year, went up to 3. Third year, we continued at 3. In the fourth year, we upped it to 5. So for the last 2 years, it's been 5 orphans. I think that's incredible, man. You know, these are real people in countries where they're not as well off, and they would have to give up their education to go and do really menial tasks, to go and raise money for their families to live and eat. And I just think it's the most beautiful thing that loads of strangers on social media have chipped together to go and do it. People don't care where these orphans are based. They don't care what color they are. They don't care what religion they are. They're just saying, yeah, fine, I'll give up what is the price of a coffee to join in with this initiative. And I did my first tweet on this for this year yesterday. And already like over £150 has come in, you know, and I'm trying to raise £1,800 for the 5 orphans again this year. So look, anyone that wants to donate, hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. It's at ArsenalMoh8, and you'll see the link in my bio, or you'll see the pinned tweet, that sort of thing. And yeah, just donate what you can, and long may it continue. I just think it's the best thing that I do as a result of all of this.
We'll drop a link in the description below as well for whoever's watching. And Mo, just want to say thank you for your time and coming to speak to us. It's been a pleasure sort of picking your brains about football in general, not just Arsenal. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Do you have any sort of final tips for any sort of young ethnic minority who's looking to sort of break into talking about football in front of a camera, etc.?
Yeah, listen, be confident about it. Don't think for a second that you are not good enough, that you're not welcome, because ultimately there are hundreds and thousands of people just like you as a young British Asian or whatever ethnicity you are. There's thousands of people like you in their living rooms, you know, talking, doing exactly what you're doing, talking with real credibility and knowledge. And the one thing I always say is that if you really, really want to find out about a team, don't go to the pundits, don't go to Gary Neville, don't go to the journalists, don't go to John Cross, go to fans of that team. No pundit is going to be able to tell me who Arsenal's 6th choice striker is, but a fan will. Yeah, and that is the acid test for those people that really know. So if you properly know your club, if you properly know your football, you'll know deep down and take that confidence and believe in yourself. But it's a competitive space as well. So if you're going to do it properly, and make sure that you've got your insurance. You know, don't sell yourself short in life.
Great advice, Mo. Thank you once again. Guys, thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and see you guys again next time.